Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is never ethical to eat factory farm, no matter how good it tastes, no matter the type of meat, no matter where you eat it, where it's from, it's not ethical. Not on Friday, not on Saturday, not even on Sunday. It's not ethical. Factory farming, the way we produce this meat, is extremely cruel to animals. Many of you have likely been dissuaded from eating veal in the dining hall by Cedric on the serving line, and he isn't lying. Keeping animals in tiny cubicles for their entire lives, stuffing tubes down the throats of baby cows in the case of veal, crowding so many chickens into tiny cages that some suffocate, and pumping animals so full of steroids and antibiotics that their legs can no longer support their weight, and they collapse, unable to move until other animals trample them to death, or workers throw their carcasses away because it's better to bring animals to processing line alive. This is a cruel industry, and this fact has been well publicized despite extensive industry cover-ups. Now, no one except the darkest sadist would characterize the killing of an animal as good in itself. And without being able to claim that it is necessary, it is unconscionable that we do it in such a terrible way. But even with its cutting corners in safety and humane standards, factory livestock remains an incredibly inefficient industry. Grains used for feed, an unnatural food source for animals that have evolved to eat grass, would provide between 2 and 5 times as many calories if they didn't have to go through an animal's stomach and meat to get on our plates. Because of this, more land is required to meet our food needs through meat. About 30% of ice-free land is used indirectly or directly in livestock production, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. As this area increases, and it is increasing due to population increases and an increase in the consumption of meat, deforestation takes place, including of tropical rainforests. The majority of corn and soy grown today is not food for us, but rather food for our food. So it's less attractive to farmers and more expensive for consumers to give the requisite calories. This burden is highly regressive, hurting the poorest and hungriest the most. The protests against fair tortilla prices in Mexico in 2007 and 2008 are one incident of this. In order to keep this inefficient system running, massive farm subsidies were required. By the United Nations figures, over 30% of farm income is from subsidies. The cost of meat is 50% more than you see on the menu. The U.S. government is footing the rest of the bill. This burger is brought to you by Senator Inhofe, something which the senator has a problem with because he believes global warming to be a hoax perpetuated by the Weather Channel. However, as someone who acknowledges that climate change is a real and largely human-caused phenomenon, I can identify some of the numerous ways in which the livestock industry is contributing to it and other environmental problems. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, this industry produces almost 20% of greenhouse gases. That's more than transportation does. In Iowa alone, farms and pork factories produce 50 million tons of manure each year. Throughout the country, the lagoons of this stuff pollute groundwater, streams, rivers, and even vegetable fields. Almost 75% of EPA-recorded water pollution incidents are agriculture caused. Here in the United States, with a full range of food options, we've evidently decided that we should pay more to be less healthy. Factory farmed meat is tied to heart disease and obesity, as might be expected, but also, surprisingly, to diabetes and some kind of cancer. In addition, the overuse of antibiotics to get livestock fatter faster puts everyone at risk. By decreasing the effectiveness of antibiotics and increasing the chances of outbreaks of drug-resistant bacteria. That seems unconvincing, and consider the now frequent recall of lettuce and other vegetables for E. coli and other germs. Given this, it might surprise you to learn that vegetables can't develop E. coli. Rather, the recalls are necessary because runoff of excrement from nearby livestock farms gets onto the vegetable fields. All these health issues come at a significant societal cost. Meat is, in this manner, rather like cigarettes. It hurts your health, and hospital costs are paid by all of society. And to this, the severe inefficiencies and subsidy costs, and we have a very high price tag for society to produce something we don't need. It takes resources away from more noble causes, like say, education, welfare, healthcare. And all this cost isn't without a higher price to the individual consumer either. A vegetarian diet is significantly cheaper than one with meat. And frankly, it is unconscionable that we should bewail our wealth in animal sacrifices to our appetites, rather than giving it to help people who are hungry, sick, and poor, or giving it to the God who demands and deserves the devotion of all of our wealth. But there are, however, some things that you can ethically eat, like beans, tofu, milk, nuts, yogurt, bagels, oatmeal, tempeh, lentils, quinoa, chickpeas, peanut butter, spinach, potatoes, cheese, broccoli, brown rice, and butter. In addition to being a list of some of my favorite things, except in tempeh, I don't like tempeh, these are also very good sources of protein. Actually, even if you're a meat eater, you're already consuming a significant amount of vegetable protein. You would need more if you were to adopt a fully vegetarian diet, but likely not as much as you think. The average American citizen consumes around twice the government's recommended protein intake, much of it from meat. My point is that you don't have to eat meat. It's a historical and geographic anomaly that we can and do eat meat 3 times a day. Eating 200 pounds of meat every year, the U.S. average, is absolutely not necessary and unconscionable. Thank you.
Well, it must be said at the outset that in telling the details of the story, the person with the proposition naturally has an advantage in telling the details of the story because they are obviously graphic and may tend to cause disturbance. But since the proposition is, it is never ethical to eat factory farmed meat, it is fitting that at the outset we understand definitions and terms involved in this debate. And therefore, in opposing this proposition, I want to make 3 points in the following order. The first is the idea of rights. The second is the idea of cruelty and the reality of physiology. And the third point that I want to make in opposing this proposition is the idea of extending the moral sphere from humans onto animals. So the first point, the idea of rights. It is one thing to say that the suffering of animals, of non-human animals, just as the suffering of us humans, is a bad thing in itself. But in the area of ethics, a right as something opposed to right versus wrong is generally defined as a strong and legitimate claim that can be made by the claimant against someone. The rebuttal to this idea of rights is that there is this notion of sentience or consciousness, and its famous proponent, Jeremy Bentham, said something like this: to know the ethical status of animals, we need not ask if they can speak, but only whether or not they can suffer. While this would mean that suffering of animals in factories should be avoided and mitigated, it is nevertheless far from saying it is never ethical to eat factory farmed meat. So the idea of rights, while it is an ethical term, cannot be applied to the nature of this debate. Secondly, the idea of cruelty and the reality of physiology, of human physiology. The nature of the topic is such that what counts as cruelty will be disputed as this pertains to ethics and morals. This, of course, has to do further with the understanding of human biology. Evolutionarily speaking, humans are omnivorous animals, containing both the anatomy and the physiology, meant for eating, among other things, also meat. Factory farmed meat, like other products which are produced in mass through factory production, provides those humans who choose to exercise their choice of eating habits by choosing to eat meat. And may I remind us that it is quite a significant portion of the human population. Easy access to the obtainment of meat. While all steps may be taken to avoid willful cruelty in general to animals both outside and inside factories, to place the issue of eating factory farmed meat in the arena of ethics and morals of human behavior in such a way to say that it is never ethical to eat factory farmed meat, and to call a natural desire for food, in this case meat, unethical, is a bit counterintuitive. To make the final point at this point, extending the moral sphere from humans onto animals is something that we need to think about seriously. For the greater part of its 2,500-year history, moral philosophy was almost exclusively focused on humanity. This extending of the moral sphere from humans onto animals has a value in it. Animals with a certain kind of nervous system can feel pain, and human beings are not the only animals by any chance with such a system. And therefore, extending this moral sphere from humans onto animals does have a certain value. Qualified opinion has changed over time, and it has come to be pretty widely accepted that animal suffering extends beyond physical pain, and it includes mental states such as fear and anxiety, and that is true. But some attributions still strike many of us as a bit fanciful. For example, take the idea of grief. I, or any of us, may be more likely to grieve or to have a sense of sorrow because of something we have done. If I have hurt you or you have hurt me, I have a sense of sorrow, and I feel sorry for what I did in the future, reflecting back upon the past, at which point I felt sorry. But this idea of grief or sorrow does not apply equally well to animals. So this is the first problem with extending the moral sphere. Let's take the idea of embarrassment. If humans were unclothed, I would guess that most often humans would feel a sense of embarrassment, although not necessarily always. But if animals were unclothed, they would not necessarily feel the sense of embarrassment in an equal way that humans feel that. So this is the problem with extending the moral sphere. So with extending the moral sphere, we encounter the problem, or perhaps even the danger, of anthropomorphizing animals, which are non-human. And therefore, to treat animals as quasi-human beings is not always helpful. So even though there are both physical and mental kinds of suffering that is just simply implausible to deny, there is still some scope for reasonable differences of opinion about what we may and may not do to other animals. And there is rather greater scope for debate about what counts as unnecessary suffering. Thank you.